Hey everyone, Tim K here, host of the Veterans Project podcast, founder of the Veterans Project and the Caregiver Project as well. I'm here to talk to you today about this incredible podcast we have coming up. It's a two-part series on a legend of the Marine Special Operations community who just so happened to be the first Black Marine Recon officer as well, Major James Capers Jr. You're not going to want to miss a single word of this podcast. Now, this podcast is accompanied by the project, which is premiering today around the same time, so you'll be able to read along with that as well. Every single word that this man speaks is just truly that of a legend. So I want you to take the time to really ruminate on this, to really soak this in, absorb all of this material because it is special and he is one of our most legendary. Now, I would not have been able to do this podcast without this incredible organization or this project. I wouldn't have been able to do either one without this incredible organization, the Marine Reconnaissance Foundation, which I have personal experiences with, and they are just an incredible organization. I am honored to have them sponsoring this podcast and project. The Marine Reconnaissance Foundation, or MRF, is committed to serving the Marine reconnaissance community and its veterans by providing assistance to active duty, retired, and former members of the recon community. The foundation aims to provide immediate emergency and reoccurring deliberate support for the reconnaissance Marines and special amphibious reconnaissance corpsmen of all generations and their families. In addition, the MRF strives to share and perpetuate the storied lineage, history, and traditions of the reconnaissance community. The MRF is a registered national nonprofit 501c3 organization who is able to provide annual reoccurring programs and emergency support because of the generosity of large and small businesses and patriotic citizens and their families. If you're interested in donating to the MRF, please visit their donation portal on reconfoundation.org. That's reconfoundation.org. or at the link in our description via PayPal. Visit reconfoundation.org to learn more about this incredible organization and all they are doing for the Marine Recon community. There are lives so well lived that the encapsulated measure of their influence and stature is truly almost incomprehensible if we look at the scope of where they came from and where they ended up. Who rises up from the ashes of the downtrodden, the persecuted and neglected sects of our society? How would that story read? Who would that human be? You know, there was a boy from Bishopville, a son of sharecroppers, whose story seems so unlikely that many have called it a legend. But we assure you that every word is completely factual. In all actuality, the reality of the story is probably more powerful than the tale itself. A young black child grows up in those oppressed and subjugated segments of a nation that's supposedly built on the principles of freedom for all, but not living up to its foundational promises. Does that child one day become a man and rise up in passionate vitriol against the man, becoming a pinnacle of revolution and revolt? Or does he tackle those problems from a different angle? This podcast is not meant to act as a social commentary, but merely a legacy piece on one American's example of the reality of ultimate persistence against all odds. James Capers Jr. was born to be a Marine. In fact, in a 2011 speech, General Paul Lefebvre referred to him as the father of Marine Special Operations as he was inducted into the Commando Hall of Honor at MacDill Air Force Base. His courageous actions that day in Vietnam, which are once again under review for the Congressional Medal of Honor, are simply a microcosmic example of his entire life. You know, they are also indicative of a man who showed up as the prototype of what it truly means to be a special operations warrior. He has constantly lived with a heart of pure purpose, incessantly persevering through every single life obstacle, whether systemic or constructed by those around him to hinder his meteoric rise to the ranks of the United States Marine Corps. Where some may have seen a closed door as a roadblock, Major Capers voraciously kicked those doors down in pursuit of something greater than himself. Although the Major has been robbed by the Marine Corps time and time again in his quest for our nation's highest military honor, we all know the reality of the matter and the man. We know that this Marine has been one of our elite examples of what it truly means to be a Marine. And we are all better as a nation for him having lived to serve. Every impeded step towards success that Major Capers took in a construct built-in expectancy of his failure was a step forward in the advancement of freedom for all of us. You've already said enough, though. Here he is, with an education on overcoming, Major James Capers Jr.
The Veterans Project is a comprehensive essay capturing the legacies of our warfighters, caregivers, and civilians who have stepped forward in defense of our patriotic principles in an effort to capture their stories and to never forget the staggering sacrifices of our nation's finest. This is the Veterans Project podcast, where our legacies are the mission. Here's your host, Tim Kay.
Welcome to the Veterans Project podcast. My name is Tim Kay, and I'll be your host. With me is a wonderful man, Major James Capers. Major, I appreciate you being with me.
Thanks, Tim.
So, we want to go back through your whole life and talk about where you grew up, Bishopville, and, talk a little bit about life growing up. And then, talk more about the combat and move into your time in Vietnam, but also your time in getting out. So if we could just start from your childhood and how you grew up, that would be awesome.
Obviously, you just covered my whole life right there. But, yeah.
He's a comedian, too.
Yeah. Well, looking back at my childhood, some days were extremely pleasant, but as I grew older and looked back in my past and realizing they were very difficult days because of racism, Jim Crow, and things of that nature. As a child, you don't see the horrors of Jim Crow or sharecropping because your parents take care of you. And you see the goodness of the world when you're out picking cotton and cropping tobacco and feeding the hogs and picking the fruits. Those are the things I remember, and they were not bad things, in terms of milking the cows and trying to learn to ride horses. We had a horse named Big Red, and I was always scared of Big Red. They'd put me on Big Red, and he'd throw me off. But I kept trying. I never did learn to ride Big Red. I don't think he liked me very much, but those are the things I remember in the South. Just keep trying. I learned a lot of things in the South, but, relatively speaking, during the studying and realizing the Jim Crow laws and how hard my parents had it, it wasn't a pleasant time for them. I do realize what they had to go through living the life of a sharecropper. I had 4 brothers which died in early childhood.
Wow.
Of childhood diseases. 4 of us survived. Once we got to Baltimore, my father did a little time on the chain gang, what they used to call a penal system, for a crime he didn't commit.
Wow.
But, but that's the way it was in the South. And, of course, a lot of African-American men were hung because of minor infractions of what they call the laws. But he left. I'm not sure how he got to Baltimore, but he left and went to Baltimore, got a place for us to stay and sent for us. And my mother and my sister and my 2 brothers, we ended up in Baltimore and joined him.
Mm-hmm.
We stayed in Baltimore until I joined the Marines I was about 17 and left when I was about 18, go to boot camp at Parris Island, South Carolina. But the South was always prevalent in my mind. I never forgot it because I had gotten sick, probably the same diseases that killed my other elder siblings. But there was a white family that took me in, and these stories were told to be my aunts and uncles who were still alive then, that this family, which I don't remember, took me in and cared for me. And whatever the disease I had, which I probably would have died from, helped me survive. So that was always a big thing in my mind as I grew up. Who are these people? It was a wonderful thing for me to remember that everybody's not bad. I have no idea what the names were, where they were from, but sometimes as I grew older, I tried to remember something about them that might help me remember who these folks were. But when I came back to my family, I was told that, I was talking, I was relatively young, but they told me that I was speaking a language that they didn't really understand. So I must have picked up something from this family.
Wow.
My father was a wanted man for the rest of his life.
Wow.
He changed his name. I was a part of that, and I watched that as I grew up. I was lucky because he told me a lot of those wonderful stories about the South and the hunting and the fishing and the things that was part of his life, the things that, that he saw and he enjoyed. It was designed to make me feel comfortable. And that's life that he lived until he got in trouble. He loved that life. I loved him. He gave me a mission before he passed away to take care of the family. I was the youngest, and he said, "You're my youngest child, so now it is your job to keep the family going, and you take care of them." And I did that. I buried each one of my brothers and sisters, all of my aunts and uncles. I was able to at the time. I had been in the military, and I was doing relatively well. So I followed his instructions or his wishes. And he died at age 75. No one in my family ever lived beyond age 75. I'm at age 82 now. I'll be 83 in a few months.
You've made it 7 years longer already. What do you remember about your dad, your father, as far as him teaching you? Obviously, he taught you perseverance. I know the Marine Corps gave you a lot of that, but a lot of Marines have that perseverance already built in from when they were growing up. What do you remember about your dad?
I remember a lot about my father because on my way to boot camp, and I talked about that in the documentary and the book I wrote. If 10 men starts up a flight of steps, if only one makes it to the top, you believe that you'll be that man, and it will be so. In other words, he was telling me that no matter how hard it is or how hard you have to struggle, if you believe in yourself, you can make it to the top. And I carried those words with me all the way through boot camp and all the way through life. And he didn't say much about the horrors. He didn't tell me how he got out of South Carolina and got to Baltimore. He didn't tell me how hard it was to leave his wife and 4 young children behind. I think he was trying to basically spare me from some of the horrors that he experienced. And it was just such a wonderful time when he come here to live with me. And we sat around a table and, I'd cry sometime because he would spare me the hardships. It was always something positive.
Wow.
He was a positive man, even though, he'd had a hard time.
And that went on to help you in the jungles of Vietnam.
Yeah,
certainly.
Exactly. Exactly.
What do you remember about your mother and how she was?
Wonderful woman.
Yeah.
I'm a mama's boy. I remember hanging around my mom, holding on to her apron. She loved me. I was the youngest child. She wasn't an educated woman, but she was a mother. She was mama. And I called her a mama until the day she died.
Wow.
She'd scrounge up monies from somewhere to send me to the movies until I got old enough to, sell newspapers and make my own living. I have pictures of her too. She was a wonderful woman.
Wow.
And a good mother. She sometimes had to rein in my old man because he got to Baltimore and he was sort of a rascal.
Do you feel like they instilled those Christian values in you pretty early on?
My mama took me to church every Sunday.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
You told me one particular story yesterday about your dad, about a white man coming into the house. Do you mind relaying that story to me?
Yeah, that's true story. It's kind of scary, but we had a little small house in Baltimore. We had a little potbelly stove on the first floor. You put wood and coal in there, coal oil, and it was the way we heated the house. And at night, we closed the stove down, and we'd all go to bed and put on extra clothing or whatever it was because we didn't have any electricity. So we come down one morning. I guess my old man was going to start the fire up, and there was this guy sitting there in a chair not too far from the fireplace. He was just sitting there. It was a white guy. And my father come down and saw him sitting there, and he asked him, "What are you doing in my house?" And he says, "I don't know how I got in here, but I was tired, hungry, and I was cold." And my father, who was a big man, looked down at him, and he reached in his pocket and pulled out 75 cents. And he gave it to this person and said, "You go get you some food and try to warm yourself up, but don't come back in my house. If you come back into my house again, I'll snatch the breath out of your heart. I'll snatch the breath out of your chest."
Wow.
One of the most frightening things I ever heard. How do you snatch the breath out of his chest? The way he said that, as a child, I'm looking at this, I figured that if this person come back into the house, my father would, not turn the other cheek.
No.
He was kind of scary. But the kindness of him giving this person he didn't know 75 cents, the way he said that, as a child, I'm looking at this, I figured that if this person come back into the house, my father would, not turn the other cheek.
No.
He was kind of scary. But the kindness of him giving this person he didn't know 75 cents and said, go get you some food, warm yourself up. I thought that was the epitome of humanity. As much as my father had wrong things done to him, he was doing the right thing. I learned from that.
Wow.
I learned from that. Didn't matter what color he was or where he come from.
And 75 cents back then was a lot.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
As a child, I learned that my father's a good man. He was a good man.
What's funny is those values really
Yeah.
made their way into your life and all
Yeah.
his teachings, his comedy, his sense of humor,
Yeah.
but perseverance, honor, courage,
Yeah.
all those things made their way into your life.
He
as
had them
you
all. He
joined
had
the
them all,
Marines.
and I inherited them all.
That's
And I
awesome.
tried to emulate everything that he told me as I grew and had a career in the military. Even when I was in the military, as a commanding officer, I tried to instill in my troops those values that I'd learned from my father and from some of the senior military officers and enlisted men that I was privileged to serve with. One is sitting here now. As I told you, I have a tendency to look at him because it's Sergeant Yerman, and he's the one. If it had not been for him, I wouldn't be here today. He is the sergeant. He just a great guy and reminds me a lot of those men and women who sacrifice so much for other people.
What do you remember? When do you remember race being recognized for the first time? When do you first remember recognizing?
I never knew that. I didn't grow up with that in mind because I didn't see that. When I got to Baltimore, I worked for a Jewish grocer, Mr. Phil was his name, and he had a grocery store on a corner, and I used to work there for him when I got out of school. He had those strange markings on his arm. He'd come from Germany. Apparently, he'd been one of the Jewish folks who were, had the Nazi marks on his arm. And he told me some of those stories. I don't remember those stories now. Mr. Phil was another person I learned so much from. Back in those days, this was a predominantly black community. And I had a chance to see his kindness. I'd see a mother come in there with a couple of children and tell Mr. Phil, my husband didn't get paid this week, or my husband is on strike or whatever. And he would say to me, JC, take Miss So-and-so around the store and get her what she needs and bring it up here to the counter. I'm almost in tears.
Wow.
I learned from that. This was a small grocer, and he was helping the community out. We didn't have a lot of African Americans in that community at that time. So most of them there was on hard times. And a lot of them got welfare checks and things of that nature during that era. My father would never accept welfare, never got a welfare check.
Wow.
Would never do that. No, that was my dad. He didn't believe in that.
Wow.
But there were other people who were having a hard time, and Mr. Phil was there. He was the person that you went to when all was lost. And those are the things that I remember. And I'm sure in Nazi Germany, he learned that from that too. If you got a problem, you go to Mr. Phil.
Wow. That's awesome. What a staple.
Yeah.
What do you remember about your time in choosing to join the Marine Corps? Obviously, you grew up in Bishopville and then you moved to Baltimore.
Yeah.
What on your path made you decide that you wanted to be a Marine?
I was a patriot, and I was there during World War II. I remember when the war was over. I remember the floodlights coming over, air raid wardens coming to the neighborhood and making you turn your lights out. So we were taking precautions. And I remember when World War II was over in Europe, there were so many people out in the streets. They were celebrating and hugging everybody, and I was just out with the crowd, didn't really know, the meaning of it. The war was over, then I saw the newspapers. I could read at that time, victory in Europe and some other things it said. Because I'd read about the war in Europe and I knew about Hitler and the whole bit. But now the war was over. What does all that mean? And then the troops started coming home. I remember the troop trains. They were coming home with different cities. They would come, freedom trains. They had American flags on them. Soldiers were on them. They'd come through the cities and people would go out and wave to them. and all these flags, and the soldiers would be there waving to folks, and they went from city to city.
Wow.
And I remember them coming through Camden Station, where I left for boot camp at Camden Station. But it was also patriotic, but also heard people cry when they got the telegrams that your son or father had been killed during the war. Through the years, as I grew to be a teenager, I knew that this was a great country and it needed to be defended. And all of the things that we heard on the radio, didn't have TV at that time, but you had war correspondents broadcasting right from the battlefield and how important it was for us to defend the country. And when you turn 18, you had to register for the draft. They had a draft back in those days. I went down and got my card, and but I was going to, join it. I was in high school, and I was going to join the service anyway. But when I was in high school, the Marine recruiters and Army, Navy, and Air Force, they all came over and gave their pitch. And the Marine came in dress blues, and boy, he looked like he had tons of medals, and seemed like the most in charge guy there.
Those Marine Corps dress blues will do it.
Yeah, I'll tell you. And he said, this isn't for everybody, but we're the best. And he talked to the stuff I used to talk years ago. We're the best there is, and the whole bit. And I figured, hey, this sounds pretty good. I like the uniform. I like what he says, and so me and my buddy, we joined the military, and we talked about joining the Foreign Legion just as a joke, but no, let's join the Marine Corps. That's probably tougher than the Foreign Legion anyway. So we joined and went off to Parris Island and made our fortune as Marines. We lost him about 10 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Parris Island was the only place where they were sending African-American Marines, right?
Well, they weren't allowed to come in the Marine Corps until 1942.
Wow.
A place called Moffett Point.
Right.
And it's still there now.
Right down the road from here.
Yeah, Moffett Point. And they've got memorials out there to those guys from World War II. There was 20,000 African-Americans who joined the Marine Corps. Up until that time, you couldn't join until I think Eleanor Roosevelt asked the president, why isn't African-Americans allowed to join the Marine Corps? And that took care of that. And in 42, they started recruiting. And a lot of them were not allowed to fight with the 1st Division because there were still suspicions whether they had enough courage or this or that. A lot of those guys did very well. They put them in separate battalions. A lot of them were artillerymen, initially cooks and bakers, but they proved themselves. They fought in Guadalcanal all the way through the Pacific. And I think a few years ago, the president gave the Marine survivors from World War II, gave them the gold medal.
Wow.
And the ones, the ones who were gone, we gave the gold medals to their wives.
Wow.
I was lucky enough to help find those ladies, the widows, and I bought the medals for them out of my pocket.
Wow.
Yeah.
Those Marines as forefathers to you meant a lot to your service?
Yeah, I knew Hashmark Huff, one of the first guys that joined, kind of scary guy.
Yeah.
And there was quite a few guys that come in during the World War II. I'm sorry, Hashmark Johnson and Edgar Huff. Now, Huff was 6'6".
Oh, wow.
And he had a very light voice, and I was like a girl. Boy, you get over here. But, instead of being that gruff voice, he had a very light voice.
Surprised you coming out of his mouth.
Kind of comical.
Yeah.
But he was the first sergeant major in the Marine Corps.
Wow.
Nice guy. I remember him being a battalion sergeant major. And he called me in the back of a tent one time and told me about World War II. And he said that they were in amphibious landing boats getting ready to make a landing, and it didn't give me any ammunition. What he called a decoy. They made the Japanese think that they were going to be landing, and they were just going to be a decoy. And the other guys landed, but then the African-American troops didn't have any ammunition. Now, I don't know how that happened, but it wasn't a good story. But he told me about those stories. I was a sergeant then, and his battalion commander was inspecting my troops. And while he was inspecting the troops, he called me in the back of this tent and started telling me about World War II and Korea, passing it on. And like I pass it on to my guys, and not necessarily just the black guys, because at that time, the Marine Corps was integrated in 1949. when they were allowed to go to the regular boot camp, either in San Diego or in Paris Island. So I joined in 1956, and a lot of the guys who went through boot camp were still there. They taught me a lot of things, a little bit hard, I thought. Some of these guys were really scary because us young guys, we didn't know anything, and they wanted us to succeed. So they put us through the ringer, and they just instilled, to me anyway, because I was not a large guy, but some of these guys were huge. I don't know where they got those guys from, but I was told that the recruiters would have the guys line up and they would take the ones they thought was best suited for the Marine Corps. And he took the big guys. When I came through the 56th, Korean War was over, and they were kind of taking what they could get. And I had a high school diploma, and I was about average height and size. So they took me. Didn't do very well initially, but I caught on. I caught on.
Yeah. So Vietnam had not kicked off by the time you joined.
No, Vietnam had kicked off in '54, but the French was there.
That's right, yeah, Indochina.
Didn't being fooled. They didn't do very well there. And they tried to get Eisenhower to give them $15 million to continue the war, and Eisenhower said no. So the French backed out of Vietnam, and then we got conned into helping the Vietnamese out. We started arriving there in 1964 when they started sending Army Special Forces in there, advisors. In 65, the Marines went in with a heavy battalion. They did Operation Starlight, and they had credit for something like 600 and some kills. I saw some of the guys from Operation Starlight. We got there in 66 as a third force. I joined a group called Third Force Recon Company, which was specially designed to go to Vietnam.
How did you come about joining that?
It was a new organization, and I had served 3 years in First Force Recon Company. I was an old Marine pathfinder. We jumped in ahead of the troops and set up landing zones and cleared minefields for the troops to land. But I did 3 years with that, and spent some time overseas. Did some time in Philippines and one Formosa. But some of the islands, we were doing some hydrographic surveys on the beaches. We were headquartered in Okinawa, but we spent 13 months over there. And after that was over, coming home, the Russians had brought some nuclear weapons into Cuba. This is a well-known story. And President Kennedy, who was president at that time, came in when Eisenhower was president, and Kennedy was now president. And there was a big battle between him and Nixon, and Kennedy won. Kennedy decided that he would put some advisors in. I don't remember the president of Vietnam was. And some of this stuff goes in, I can't remember everything, but we decided to go in and help the Vietnamese people out, first as advisors, and some of those guys were killed, and we sent in some of the Marines, and it escalated. I think we ended up with something like 500,000 servicemen in Vietnam at that time. Then we started, the retrograde and brought them out, and the North Vietnamese swept down and took South Vietnam over. There was 16 million in South Vietnam and 14 million in North Vietnam.
Wow.
But, and we thought we were going to win the war by attrition. If we just fought them off and killed more of them that they sent down, then we'd be victorious. And there were some that wanted to go ahead and send 2 or 3 Marine divisions in North Vietnam, but that didn't happen either. But they waited us out. We came in with the CIA and with the Marines and different organizations. We did some bombing, but all of that didn't help us. We had this psychological warfare going on, but they persevered. And, we tried the peace treaties, and they didn't want the peace treaties. They said, no, the Americans got to go. And we kept building up, and we lost 55,000 that was killed during that war. I heard somebody say the other day that the virus has killed over 100,000 people. Now, we killed more in this virus than we lost in war. And we lost 55,000 that was killed during that war. I heard somebody say the other day that the virus has killed over 100,000 people. Now, we killed more in this virus than we lost in World War II and Korea and Vietnam. So it's a grim thought, but to us, it was hard. We had to fight and endure the losses and the tears. Of course, the tears now because of the virus, but it was hard on our country, and because the country was divided. There were some who didn't think we should be there, and they rioted in the streets and they protested, and then they blamed us. They blamed Sergeant Yerman and myself for not winning the war. We came home, they said nasty things about us. They threw things at us, and they blamed us for being the first to lose the war. Well, we didn't lose the war. We didn't win it. We didn't go there to win it. We went there to win the hearts and minds and to stabilize the governments. President Nixon said he's going to bring everybody home, so he did. And from there on out, we became the generation who didn't come home like the Army did and the Marines did on those freedom trains. Sergeant Yerman and I came home in a medevac plane in the middle of the night, and they put our ambulance cots on the ground. I remember him singing "God Bless America." He was a patriot. We were all patriots. Nobody reached down to shake our hands or to say, "Welcome home."
How did you feel about that when you got back? What was the feeling for you?
I was a patriot, part of the deal. But I was hurt personally because we lost a lot of good men. A lot of my good friends, not necessarily all of mine in my unit, but in different units. Marine Corps is a family. We eat, we sleep, we fight. If necessary, we die as a family. And when you lose somebody who will cook or bake or an artillery, that's still a Marine.
Yes, sir.
We were lucky. We didn't lose that many in our group, but one too many.
Yes, sir. What do you remember about when you first got on the ground in Vietnam? What was the feeling for you?
Scared.
Yes, sir.
For my troops, not so much for me.
Yeah.
Because I was an old grunt. I had 10 years in at that time. I'd been into combat before in Lebanon. I fought in the mountains of Lebanon. So I was seasoned, the staff sergeant. And shortly after that, they made me an officer. All the officers of my unit, when you killed or wounded or whatever, and so I was given a promotion from staff sergeant to second lieutenant in 5 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. They raised my hand, and the colonel commissioned me as an officer and a gentleman.
So battlefield commission.
I never went to officers training, never spent a day in officers training.
Wow.
Yeah.
What do you think were do you remember some of your hardest missions and some of those missions that you went on where you just didn't feel like there was a great chance of survival or great danger out there?
I think a lot of them didn't look good at first, but I had good people. I was telling you about Sergeant Yerman. He went from corporal and all the way to sergeant and became my platoon sergeant. As long as you had good men, you knew who would stand beside you. And he did that. He helped me get on there on the helicopter on the last mission when we were all wounded, lost my war dog, and all that's pretty well documented now. But the guys that were with me all were wounded, and we survived. That was probably our deadliest mission. Without my corpsman, probably several would have bled out. The guy who was running point for me, Nicola, he lost his right leg, and Stanton lost a kidney, and of course I was hit pretty bad. That was probably our most dangerous mission because that was our last mission, and because of that mission, I was given a recommendation for the Congressional Medal of Honor, and that was turned down. I was given a Silver Star instead of the Medal of Honor, but that is now moving forward. They're going to try it again through the Navy Board of Corrections. But that's where we are right about now.
We were talking a little bit about you going to Vietnam and how they had pushed back on that Medal of Honor nomination. Can you take us back to some of those missions leading up to the mission where you got nominated?
I made a ship bottom search of the aircraft carrier that carried us over because the USS Card had been blown up I think a year or so before, so we were worried about mines in the harbor there. So we got the mission, and the ship was almost 1,000 feet long. And I took my divers down, and we checked the bottom of the ship. It was a dangerous mission. And looking back on it, I was the dive master, and one of my guys come loose from his buddy line, and there was a school of tiger sharks, Army Special Forces, and some SEALs had a base there on the beach. While we were in the water, they were supposed to not drop any food in the harbor because the sharks would come out to feed on the garbage from the ships. And somewhere along the line, our ship didn't tell the Army and the Navy that we were in the water. And so the garbage scows would not drop food or drop garbage. And all the tiger sharks just showed up. You know, these were vicious sharks. They were about 8 to 10 feet long. And one of my guys got loose from his buddy line and was drifting towards the sharks. So the best thing I could do was figure out how to get him back. Now, collectively, we got him back. He wasn't eaten up by the sharks, but it was kind of scary. So I secured the, we didn't find any mines. Under the water, the bottom of the ship, wire mesh that come loose under the bottom of the ship that was used to keep things going up into the bottom of the ship and coming into the ship itself. But that had rotten away coming across the Atlantic and down through the Indian Ocean, Suez Canal. It took us 30 days to get there. So obviously a lot of that had worn away. And I was concerned that some of my guys might get sucked up into that vent there. So I secured the dive, and we got almost eaten up by the shark swimmer. And we got them all back aboard ship, didn't lose anybody. And that was one of our first missions. And we did that once in Nha Trang. Then we moved on down to Da Nang, and we did another ship out of search. We moved on to Okinawa, and we spent some time training in a northern training area, which is where the Marines had fought the Japanese in World War II. And then we went on to Vietnam in Operation Deck House 2, 3, and 4, amphibious missions. Then we moved on down to Phu Bai, and we did missions there, ran missions, and we did another diving operation there. A young Marine had been killed, and his body had been blown off in the water into the Sangbo River by a mine. My mission was to go and find the body. One of my guys found his body. That was Doc Burwell, who was a Navy SEAL attached to me, and he's my assistant dive master. He found what was left of this kid, and while we were down there, we come across a bunch of unexploded ammunition. I mean, large projectiles. So we started bringing this stuff up. We brought over 230 rounds of unexploded ammunition up and give it to the EOD guys. Took us 2 days to clear that river of all the explosive stuff that was there. I'm sure they would have used it for booby traps and those type. It was put there by the, about a VC and NVA. About a half the day, the water was cold, river was swift, dirty, smelled rotten. But we got in the water to get this kid. One of my guys said about halfway through the dive, I was a staff sergeant. I'm not sure if it was a lieutenant. Might have been a lieutenant. Ran kind of quick for me. I went from staff sergeant to lieutenant. But at that time, I think I was a lieutenant. And one of the guys says, Lieutenant, I think we might want to call it off because we hadn't found his body yet. We might want to let this one go. And I told him we got a Marine. We hadn't found a Marine yet. So we got a Marine in this water. And we don't leave anybody behind. We're going to find this boy, and we're going to send him home. And we're going to stay here until we get him. And shortly after that, Doc Burwell found him, and we got all the ammunition up, got his body, wrapped him up, sent him home to his parents. And then, I went back to the base and continued patrolling, and we just ran so many patrols, 4 and 5 day patrols. A lot of them we made contact on.
What was the hardest part of fighting the enemy on those patrols? What did you find the toughest about fighting the NVA and fighting? I guess you ran into the Viet Cong as well.
Mm-hmm.
What was the toughest part about fighting that enemy?
Well, I had known about the NVA and Viet Cong, and I'd studied guerrilla warfare for a long time. So I knew a lot of their tactics with punji snakes and booby traps and those type of things. And we studied that when we went through the guerrilla warfare school up in Okinawa. So I knew the basics of why they were fighting, what their goals were, and how they intend to, demoralize the Americans and make us go home. They didn't make us go home. We had good soldiers, good Marines, and good sailors there, and they believed in why they were fighting. I'm not sure if they thought they were fighting for the country or they were fighting for their friends, and, we're buddies. All of us pulled together. I was very successful working with the Navy SEALs, and what they used to call the UDT underwater demolition teams. The SEALs came along. They did pretty good. Then Special Forces, they had bases out there, and they helped work with the villages. And so we worked a lot with those guys. It was more or less an armed forces thing. The Air Force helped us out a lot. So there was no, as I could see, I guess I want to say there was no real prejudice. The Marines, sometimes we like to think we're the best, but there was none of that going on. We helped each other. If I needed something, I could go to the Army, and they would say, yeah, sure, we'll help you out. They gave us stuff that they had because we didn't get a whole lot. We were at the end of the food chain. So
typical Marines, not as much equipment, right?
Yeah. So the Army gave us a lot of things that we needed. I made friends with some of those guys at Special Forces. I'd been around for a long time, and I didn't have that rah, rah, rah attitude. I was trying to get what I could get for my guys. And I was lucky enough to be friends with a lot of those guys for the Navy and the Air Force and the Marines. But I'd been in 10 years that time, and I was a new lieutenant. I never went through OCS or the basic school. So, and a lot of the guys I knew, old senior chiefs and Navy chiefs and Army sergeant majors, and I got along well with them. And they, and when I became a boot lieutenant, which I was, I took a little heat from those guys. Here comes this boot lieutenant, and but I took it easily because they were right. I was a boot lieutenant. Didn't have a history as an officer, but they kidded me a lot about being so junior. But they were all helping me out. You're lieutenant now, so we know you don't know a damn thing. So we better come over here and we'll help you out. So the Army took me in, and they
better help you with directions.
Yeah. They
Can't spell lost without LT.
Right. So you know how that goes. Lieutenants take, even though I'd been in for a long time, I was very experienced, but when I got to be a lieutenant, it didn't matter. I was a boot lieutenant. And
experience went out the window.
Oh, yeah. They gave me a hard time.
Wow.
Here comes this boot. And the Army guys was hard on me. When I went over there to get something, they'd give me what I needed, but I had to go through some stuff with those guys. The Air Force the same way.
They had all remembered you when you were enlisted, huh? Before?
Yeah. They some of them say, I wouldn't accept a lieutenant. What are you doing? Getting demoted. You went from staff sergeant to second. What's wrong with you? They kidded me a lot, but they were still helping me, and I was learning as an officer.
What do you remember about being a leader in those situations where the bullets started flying and you're keeping your men in order? Obviously, you're in recon unit, so you've got some very proficient men under you. But what do you remember you were trying to impress upon them in those moments?
You see, I didn't have to because I trained them. When I got there, I had 3 men in the company. It was a new company. I had 3 men in my team, a 4-man team, and I was a sergeant. And I trained those 3 men. There was a platoon sergeant with us, but he got hurt, so I was made platoon sergeant. And we went off to Panama and Virgin Isles and different places. We went to the Jungle Warfare School in Panama, run by Special Forces. And we went to as many schools we could get to. And then we sent guys off to jump school. I'd already been to a lot of these schools, but I'm trying to train my guys and be with them. So we trained for a long time, and we had to weed out the guys who couldn't make it. That was not for everybody. Had to teach them demolitions, and it was just a hard-nosed unit. They had to run everywhere they went. We worked until 2200 every night, 10 o'clock, before we went to Vietnam. Now, once we culled out the guys who wasn't going to make it, we ended up with 6 platoons, all qualified guys. We got those guys, some from the Army, Navy, and from the Marine Corps. Had a great unit. It was a company, a couple hundred men. We decided that we couldn't pick 2 platoons that would go first and get us started. Then he would bring the other 4 platoon over in 30 days. Unfortunately, that never happened. I was picked with the 1st platoon. Lieutenant O'Donnell took the 5th platoon, and Captain Jordan was the detachment commander. He was a young guy that couldn't swim. Nice enough fella, but he was the wrong pick for the job. And I was a grizzly old platoon sergeant. And O'Donnell, who had the 5th platoon, was just a wonderful guy. He got killed halfway through the mission, shot in the heart, and his platoon did well. I picked up his platoon after he was killed, and we got another lieutenant in to replace him. So we did pretty well, but I was still pretty much in command because Captain Jordan had gotten transferred. And I was running patrols with the 5th platoon, which was my platoon. And after I got commissioned, I'm now pretty senior, so I'm running the whole detachment after Jordan was gone. And I was still running my patrols plus running the detachment. And then we went on a very dangerous mission. You asked about some of the ones that were dangerous.
Yeah.
They sent us out to find a B-57 aircraft, which had crashed in the mountains. Air Survey was a very large aircraft, and it was outfitted to carry a nuclear bomb. So the Air Force wanted it back, and my colonel called me in and gave me the mission. And I took whatever I could scrounge. Sergeant Yerman was in the hospital at that time, so I couldn't take him. So I took a couple of guys. I had about 6 men, including myself. So they dropped us in. We were supposed to parachute in, but the chopper put us in about 10 feet above in the kunai grass, elephant grass. We had to drop down there. It wasn't really that far. And then we checked the aircraft. We were looking for the pilots or anything that we could find. Didn't find anything nuclear. I'd been in nuclear, biological, chemical warfare school, so I pretty much knew what to. As a matter of fact, I would say I was an honor graduate there. That was a long time ago. But I knew what to look for. They were supposed to pick me up the next day. They dropped us in and said, it's a 1-day mission. Get the information, we'll pick you up the next day. Unfortunately, the monsoon season came and choppers couldn't fly. So I had to tell my guys, we can stay here and take our chance. We were behind enemy lines, of course. And I didn't know whether the aircraft had been shot down or what, or whether they jettisoned the nuclear bombs if they had any on there. All that area out there was rice paddies and flat ground. During the monsoon, if I was the pilot, I would have probably disarmed it if I had one and jettisoned it into the rice paddies. That was a possibility. But we didn't find anything on the aircraft. But we never knew. Nobody ever told us whatever happened, if it was armed or what they did with the nuclear weapons. But the chopper, there was not much left. I had to tell my guys, listen, they're not going to come pick us up. I got to make a decision. We can stay here, take our chances, or we can try to get home. I knew where home was. And I took out my compass and my map and my point man, and I told him to take us home. And he stood up, adjusted his pack, and we started going home. 5 days later, we got home. Took us 10 miles to get home. We crossed 2 rivers, had to go through 2 minefields. Along the way, one of my men dropped out, and he just fell on the ground and said, I can't make it. I can't go any further. I said, yes, you can. I picked him up and pushed him up the hill. So I'll kill you first before I leave you behind. One of those things you say, but, pushed him up the hill. I wasn't going to leave anybody behind. And we went through enemy territory. We swam that river. We were to get around the bouncing betties, got through one minefield. Then my scout found another one. Then we got into a firefight from the right. Didn't hurt us bad because didn't lose anybody. And then we finally got to the point where the trucks had come from Fubai to pick us up. So we're out there for 5 days, no food, no water, and didn't lose a man. It was a tough mission. It was kind of scary, facing down a full-grown tiger and those type of things.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
What was that like?
I got a glimpse of him, but Dorosky, my point man, he stopped the patrol and held us up. And we thought, well, we're going to be in contact in a minute, so I was getting ready for that. He finally moved us forward, and I asked him, what was it? He said, a full-grown tiger. He didn't make a move, and the tiger backed away.
Wow.
But those are things that I come back with 34 leeches on my body, dangerous territory. We knew the NVA was out. That was their territory. And some of the younger guys I had with me, I'm sure they wondered if we were going to make it home, but they believed in me, and they figured we'd get out of the situation we were in. But 5 days is a long time in enemy territory with no food, no water.
Those endurance moments that your father taught you growing up as a kid were making their way to the battlefield of Vietnam.
Yeah.
What do you remember about the bullets flying? Did the training just kick in those moments when you came into contact with the enemy and you came into situations like that? What do you remember about those?
Pretty much ignored them.
Yeah.
Bullets flying all around, Well, we had to. When you're in command, you can't worry about your own personal safety. You're aware of it, but my team was trained as a team. I would be the first one to open fire. Then everybody knew what they were supposed to do. I had an M79 man. I had a M60 machine gun. Each one of the men carried one carried a shotgun. We carried M16s or M14s. I would open fire. They could set off a claymore. We had it. We trained to make sure if we were up against usually 30 or 40 guys, that was a small enemy platoon or company, and we would catch them in a crossfire. Then a heavy machine gun would go down the long axis. Then each man would throw a grenade. They'd alternate throwing a hand grenade. You'd fire maybe half a magazine, then you'd throw a hand grenade. And you'd catch them. It worked smoothly. So they didn't really get a chance to get off much fire at us because we would smoke it sometimes too. We would smoke the ambush site, and they would panic, and sometimes they'd run into us. It was violent. Some of my guys said some things that had nothing to do with the mission. Enjoyed the blood sight. I wondered sometimes about were they getting to the point where they lost their humanity. It was sometimes, to me, you can never get too violent in a situation like this. We killed, I think, 23 that day. On the way back, nobody laughed, nobody pat themselves on the back, but it was just stoic, and they had that 1,000-yard stare. This is at Quezon, which is a very nasty place. So we were sent out to hold the enemy back and run patrols and drop artillery on them and airstrikes on them to keep them from attacking the base. So we had maybe 7 or 8 guys in the dog, and that's what we did day after day. We'd come in for a couple of days, get resupplied, and we'd go back out, mostly at night. It was so violent, and I didn't want them to get too used to killing because we're going to have to shut this down at some point. Right. I don't want you to take this home. Let's leave this war here. But unfortunately, we got home. The citizens brought it to us. They reminded us. They called us baby killers. They called us nasty things and, a whole bit. But we were doing what the commander-in-chief wanted us to do. Marines are that breed. When the president says go, we saddle up, we go. We don't care if it's Republican or Democrat. Eisenhower sent me to war when I was 18 years old. Never questioned it, never even thought about it. When he says go, we go. I went to war under Kennedy. I went to war under Nixon. I got a personal letter from President Nixon for another mission when he was on his way to China in 1972. He was the first American president to go to China. And my wife and I happened to be in Hawaii at the time where he landed. And my job was to make sure he didn't get killed. He stayed on our base, and I was the captain then. And I did the best I could. And at the end of my mission, he sent me a personal letter. Thanks for helping me out a whole bit. I never met him, come pretty close because he lived in the general's house, and my job was protect him while he was there. Kissinger was there. Secretary of State Rogers was there. Kissinger was not the Secretary of State at that time. Okay. He was charged of Security Council, I think it was. Bright man. One funny thing about Kissinger, he wouldn't go anywhere without a light to read by. So the vehicle, we had a man, didn't have a reading light in the car, and he wouldn't go with it. We had to get him a reading light. He would read he always had something in his hand to read, no matter what he was reading. The president wanted to go out and swim for a minute in the beach, so we had to make sure we got him out in the beach. Then we had guys in the mountains up there, snipers in the mountains, protecting him. We had Coast Guard boats out there while the president swam. So I was a part of all of that.
Wow.
We had the CIA, the FBI was there with our team. State Department security. So we had everybody there, State Department, Secret Service, and the FBI and CIA.
Wow.
And I was the guy running the base assets. Pretty nice mission for a captain.
That is a pretty nice mission.
Yeah.
So back to Vietnam.
Yeah.
You were on, how many missions had you been on when that fateful mission came up that, where you were wounded 19 times?
That was the last mission.
Okay.
And we've been there since day one. And it's hard to say how many missions we ran. There are people said 50, 60. As far as Marine missions, we probably ran about 60 on the ground and enemy territory. We usually go out for 4 or 5 days, do the mission, come back for 2 days, get cleaned up, clean our weapons, and then we go back out again. There are some that said we were there for over 100 missions, but that might have been for the whole detachment. 2 platoons went over. Then a 3rd platoon came over, I think in June or July, beefed us up, but they were sent down to Marble Mountain. So we pulled them up north where I was. I took over that platoon. Then while we were on the Special Landing Force, with another officer named Judge Spainhour, good-looking guy, giant, about 6'4", cut out of a recruiting model. And his platoon was from the 5th Recon Battalion, but we all worked together. Judd got killed on his mission. Wasn't too far from me. He bled to death. So I took over his platoon. They had no officer. I wasn't an officer at that time, but I took over his platoon. So I commanded Judge Spainhour's platoon, I called it, commanded the 3rd platoon. They had a platoon leader who left at Quai Son. So I had that platoon, but I had good NCOs, which I had known from stateside. Then I commanded O'Donnell's platoon when he got killed. I took over his. They pretty much lost it. Good guys, but they loved O'Donnell. Great man, good Christian, and they wanted vengeance. I had to sort of settle them down. Same thing with Spainhour's platoon. I had to talk to those guys and say, we got a long ways to go, fellas. No vengeance now. We'll take it out in the battlefield. But they started drinking pretty heavily, and I was a sergeant, wasn't an officer at that time, but they knew me, they trusted me, and they knew I was sincere. Got it done. They all calmed down, quit the foolishness, and you allowed 2 beers a day, I think it was. But they found ways to scrounge other stuff and got in a scuffle with other units and put a clamper on that. No, we're not going to have it. You desecrate the memory of these fine officers. And I knew them all. I loved them all. I wasn't really an officer. I was just a staff NCO trying to fill in the gaps until we got a real officer in. They commissioned me and made me a 2nd lieutenant in 5 minutes.
Were you glad to receive that commission, or did you not care either way? Did it not matter to you either way?
Well, I was glad because I had put in for it for years ago and they turned me down. I put it for commission twice.
Wow.
I was qualified, but they said considered but not selected. But you figure back in those days, they weren't looking that hard for black officers.
Right. Yeah.
But when I got commissioned at Fulby, I'm telling you, it was a good day for my guys because I'd been there with them from day one. Started with them, and now we're pretty close to getting leaving our tour in Vietnam. But they had an officer. I'd make sure they got their mail, make sure they got paid, make sure they got fed properly. I did the things that I knew should be done because the guys, they trusted me and they supported me and they helped me out a lot. Like Sergeant Yerman, he went from corporal to sergeant. He had 2 Bronze Stars with combat Vs. Vietnam. Yeah. We fought 4 amphibious landings up north, just below the DMZ. That was 4 landings, and each of them last sometimes 5 or 10 days. Come back to the ship, tend to the wounded, ship the dead back home, then came south and fought some of the bloodiest battles you want to think about. I think Quai Son was kind of tough because we spent 3 months up there fighting in the foxholes and running patrols and dodging rockets. Bloody battle in Quai Son.
Were they well equipped up there?
Yeah, that was the 324th B Division. They came down. They were trying to take Quai Son. The French had lost it in 1954 when they lost Dien Bien Phu, that whole area up there. And they thought they would run the Americans out, but they didn't realize Marines were there. At night, you'd hear them with the loudspeakers. American Yankees, you go home. Psychological warfare. They had a lady named Hanoi Hannah, and she'd be broadcasting, Marines, you die. And they'd play some kind of silly music, and they would say, Yankees, go home. And, the guys would hear that, but some of my guys would say some unrepeatable language directed toward Hanoi Hannah. They would come through the lines. They'd come up to the lines, and they had a group called sappers, and the sappers would blow themselves up and blow holes in the barbed wire.
Oh, wow.
And then their guys would run through, blowing horns or bugles, and they'd come in. And, of course, our guys were in foxholes with trenching tools, and they would attack the guys coming through. And we had the flares coming down, and the flares would lighten up the battlefield so we could see them. It was surreal, all the explosions going on, and the flares floating down, moving, things are moving around. There are human beings dying, screaming and yelling. That was the time when we had to hold on. You're not going to run us out of here. We knew about Iwo Jima. We knew about Tawa. We grew up learning about Chosin Reservoir. You don't run Marines out, and these are a lot of young guys too. And even though they're coming in and dropping rockets and things on us, no, I can't say we weren't scared, but for those young guys that pick up these entrenching tools and run towards them and come and get me, come get some. And that was a proud moment. I saw nobody run for the front lines. I saw not one Marine back up and try to go to the rear. They were all going forward to try to stop the enemy from coming through. And they were coming through, hopped up on opium and blowing bugles and all of this. Close combat. At night, when you got your buddy there, you're invincible. They can't do this. You can't run me out of here. No. We staying. I got my buddy here. And with those entrenching tools, because it was close combat, and you can't fire an automatic weapon. Because but it was kind of crazy. And the guys fought on the lines all night long. The CBs, the Army, the corpsmen, the Marines, it was all together. And during the morning, about 2, 3 o'clock, they would start restringing the barbed wire, taking care of the wounded. And it was like nothing happened that night.
Wow.
It's okay. It's okay. We'll do it tonight. We'll do it the next night. Marines don't quit.
How many nights in a row did that go for?
I was there for 3 months.
Oh, wow.
Now, it didn't happen every night for 3 months, but the threat of it was there.
Right.
We had good news because, like IQ earlier, he was a cook during the war in Iraq.
That's your son, right?
Yeah, he's my godson. He's not he's my son, like all of them,
Mm-hmm.
But he's a good guy, and he told me about the work that the cooks and bakers did in Iraq. I remembered when we had a base at a place called Dang Ha, which was a little over 30-some miles from Khe Sanh, and when the threat of us almost getting overrun, those Marines and sailors, they formed a group, and they took the cooks and the bakers, the corpsmen, the typewriter guys we call Remington Raiders, and they got on those 6x trucks. They picked up rifles and grenades, and they fought their way all the way to Khe Sanh. Sometime the trucks they had was blown up, and some kind of way they walked and ran all the way to Khe Sanh. When I'm told, I didn't hear the horns, but those guys who were not grunts, they came in blowing the horns of those vehicles. We're here to save you grunts and recon guys. They got out of their vehicles and fought on the lines, because each Marine is a basic rifleman anyway. That's the first thing you learn, like in the Army, you learn to fire a rifle. And they came up to Khe Sanh, and they fought like infantrymen. And after a day or so, they got back in their vehicles and went back to Khe Sanh, back to Dang Ha, and they got more guys. See, we didn't have enough troops up there to hold off a whole division.
Right.
They came up, and had it not been for those guys, I think, I'm not quite sure if we had enough strength up there. They eventually brought in a whole regiment. They had a hard time. But it was just guys like Recon and the CBs and Pioneers that held on until the regular guys, the regiments could come in and dig in and hold off those 2 divisions up there against us. But I always appreciated, and I quit kidding the cooks and the bakers. And, we'd call those guys the office clerks. They put sandbags under the seats because, a lot of those trucks were blown up by, like now they roadside bombs, but back in those days, they had same stuff in Vietnam. So they put these sandbags under the seats so when a bomb hit the truck, they wouldn't hit them too bad. They were good guys. So those are the things that I saw that warmed my heart.
Wow. Yeah, all fighting together.
Yeah.
One force.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You don't think about that probably as a recon man being up there, and going on some of the secret missions. But when you got to hold that big space of caisson, massive area, then you kind of need that.
You need every man you can get your home, especially when the NVA come in mass. In force.
Was that last night, your last mission, your scariest as far as getting wounded?
Don't remember being scared to the point where I couldn't function. Maybe a lot of reasons. I mean, it wasn't that. I think if anybody tells you he wasn't scared, he's probably lying. But I mean, I was aware of what was going on, and I saw people die and hit here and there, and I was always able to overcome that fear, do what I needed to do to take care of my men. After one of the missions at Quezon, I think I was trying to get my guys reorganized. Quezon was basically a fort. I was an officer at that time. I saw this corpsman. It was still dark. The fighting they were more or less retreating, and we were taking care of our wounded, whatever. And I said, Doc, I'm going to need you. You need to come with me. He was a corpsman, young guy. He said, yes, sir. You don't wear any rank in battle. I had no bars on, but he knew I was an officer. He said, yes, sir. So we came around this little curve or whatever it was there. The corpsman said to me, Lieutenant, I'm just a little tired. Can I sit down for a minute? I said, yeah, Doc. I think they're either done or they won't come back for a while. Yeah, go ahead and sit down. We were waiting for a second attack. Sometime they came back, sometime they didn't. But you're prepared anyway. You're getting everything ready for another attack until at least the sun comes up. Corpsman was sitting there. We heard the bugles, not loud. I said, Doc, look like they might be coming again. The doc says, I'm a little tired, sir. And I said, I'm going to need you, Doc. Doc didn't answer. Doc died right there at my feet. And I didn't know the kid had been hit. He didn't say anything.
Wow.
He said he didn't. He just said, I'm just a little tired. Can I sit down for a few minutes? And he didn't get up. And I didn't know that he was wounded. It was at night. He didn't cry. He didn't cry out. He just sat there and died at my feet. Then I blamed myself because I should have known. What a man. Then I wondered to myself, I'm an officer now. I'm supposed to take care of these guys. And I didn't know. Then the battle started again. And it just seemed like it never ended.
Wow.
Never ended.
How did you move past those moments?
You don't move past those moments. I see him today. I'm still there. I still see him sitting there. When I give a speech, sometimes I have an empty chair there for that young corpsman. Because I didn't forget him. I don't forget those guys. I'm not expected to. And at my age now, I'm 82 years old, soon to be 83, and those battles are so vivid in my mind and my memory, it awakens me at night. And I spent a year in a hospital in Bethesda, and it was tough there because the battles that I fought were so brutal and so heart-wrenching for the other guys too. I didn't feel much sympathy for those guys, but I know their families must have hurt as bad as my families did. So I grieved for the whole war then. It was beginning to dawn on me that what is the point of this war? But I admired my young guys. I grieved for them. I still today, in my backyard out there, I've got crosses and the names of all of the men that I lost in my unit.
Wow.
They're brass names that my wife and I put up there. And we built a memorial back there. And they're still back there of all of the men that we lost. Even my war dog's name is on there. because I cared for those guys. I loved them. I trained them, and I felt responsibility for them.
What I meant was earlier when I said, how did you move through, was how did you keep fighting when you experienced
Because I promised those guys, you will let me down before I let you down. I'm here with you. I will never leave you. And I didn't. I went all the way through them to the last battle. I was the last man to get on a helicopter, the last mission in Fulop. I went to see the mother of one of the guys, when the first guys were killed, a young man named Stanley, the one that almost drowned in the river. I went to see her and to tell her how sorry I was I didn't bring her son home. And she forgave me. But I felt so much guilt. I went on the way to Boston and spent the day with her. I was hurt. But
what's it like talking to a mom in that?
It was hard.
Yeah.
It was hard. Mrs. Scanlon, she's a nice lady, Irish family. And after I spent the dinner with her, I told her that I had to leave, that a vehicle that would pick up the next day. And I was staying at a hotel around the corner. And so I went over to a little bar. It wasn't a little bar, but it was pretty good size. They had a big fireplace there, giant fireplace with logs burning, and a bunch of Irish guys in there. And they were all half drunk and singing Irish songs. I mean, they were really just having a great time. I was sitting there. I had my uniform on because I'd gone to see Mr. Scanlon, just thinking how far I'd come. And there was only a black guy in there. I was a Marine officer. And one of the guys from the table that they were singing and carrying on came over and says, "Hey, sir, are you alone?" I said, "Yeah, I come to visit one of my casualties' family." They said, "Oh, we're so sorry, but you're a Marine, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, sir, I'm a Marine." They said, "Well, why don't you come over and join us? We're just having fun." And I said, "Well, no, I really don't feel like the night. It's been a long day, you know." They said, "Well, you can," he asked. I said, "Okay." And they all came over to my table. The whole damn table come over. They all sitting there singing. They're singing there, still drunk. Irish eyes are smiling. And some of the good old art, which I had learned in school. And I tried to sing a few songs. It was a good night, and they were such great guys. They thanked me for what we're doing in Vietnam. They just, it was a pleasant evening. When I was really sad, now I'm cheered up. I mean, some of those Irish songs, and they were drunk and they weren't good singers, but it was fun being with them. And they made my night. The big fire it was kind of chilly, and the big fire was burning, and they were all in there having a good time.
Wow. And
I said goodbye, and then I went to the hotel, spent the night. Next morning, my driver came and picked me up. I was going overseas, going to Europe for a year.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So you ran missions in Vietnam with the CIA? You worked with them?
Well, we did the POW mission. That was the president authorized that, President Johnson, sanctioned by him. And the CIA, they found a prisoner named Lapp. He was 18 or 19 years old. He was a prison guard, and it had American POWs in it. So somewhere along the line, they thought that he wasn't treating the Americans. We had some Australians there and 26 South Vietnamese. That was the POW camp. So Lapp escaped, and the CIA picked him up, brought him to us, and he was eventually brought to me for safekeeping. So he stayed in my tent with me for safekeeping. But before we went out, a lot of that is on the film. I threatened him, let him know that if you any kind of way are lying to us, said how I'd kill him, but I missed that now. Nice kid. I got my first Purple Heart, my first Bronze Star there.
Wow.
Now that mission is being looked at for the Medal of Honor.
Wow. That mission as well.
Yeah.
Wow. But did you come upon a camp? Were you able to find the camp?
We found the camp.
Yeah.
We found the camp, and we killed the guards, but there were no POWs there.
Wow.
So obviously we blew the camp and tore it down.
Yeah.
They'll never have another American prisoner there. We had a fight with the guards, and then the chopper that come to pick us up couldn't land because of the jungle. So they had to drop a hoist. You've been in the Army, you know how you do that, yeah.
Yes, sir.
So the Ranger and Raider stuff. So each man had to go up there by horse. And Yerman and I were the last ones on the ground. And he didn't want to go up. He wanted to stay on the ground. Me to go up, and he stay on the ground and fight him off.
Yerman's a little stubborn.
Yeah, I said, no, you know. So he went up, and then it seemed like forever before the chopper, the horse come back down. I'm on the ground hooking and jabbing. I could see him running across us, and I was doing the best I could. I was throwing as many grenades and firing as much as I could because they were trying to shoot down the chopper. The rest of my men was in the 46. I killed as many as I could, and when I looked up, the horse wasn't coming down.
Wow.
Apparently, the pilot thought that when Yerman got on board, he was the last man. And Yerman went up to tell the pilot, hey, listen, you still got a man, lieutenant still on the ground. You can't leave. And then there was discussion about the fuel and whatever it was. And Yerman insisted with his rifle, no, you're not going to leave him on the ground. So then the horse started coming down, and I looked up. My guys had broken the windows out of the chopper and was firing around to cover me.
Wow.
Shell casings was dropping, and they were trying to cover me, and I was firing as much as I could. I still had plenty of ammunition, but one of the guys saw me fall. I hit a clump of dirt, and I stumbled, and one of the guys thought I was hit, but I wasn't hit at that time. I didn't get hit till I got the horse around me. Usually it takes two men. One man standing, the other guy put the horse around him. But this time I had only God. That was a good story. I believe that even though there was nobody physically there to help me out, God was standing with me and helped me put that horse on. Because there was no way I could have done it by myself.
Wow.
And this was a good God story. You know, when people wonder about, is God real? I explained how I got up in that helicopter. Somebody tell me how I did that. And who helped me put this horse on. With all the gear I had on and everything was going on, I got this horse on and started on the way up, and the horse stopped.
Oh, no.
So I figured, yes, what I said. I didn't say exactly that, but I said the other words.
Some other choice words.
Wait a minute.
Some military words.
And I figured I'm spinning around up there, and everybody's firing. God, I'm dying, going to hell now. But when I got up close to the chopper, I got hit.
Oh, wow.
Said, oh, yeah, bleeding all over the place. But they pulled me in. I was hit in the face, and it was a bleeder.
Oh, wow.
And I looked down, and blood everywhere, and they laid me down. And my corpsman who was with me, he was the Navy SEAL that with me on the diving mission, patched me up. They took off and took me home, took us back to our base camp. It was a sad thing because I didn't get the POWs. Yeah. Because I had rehearsed that. My name is Lieutenant Jim Capers. I come and take you home.
Wow.
Didn't get to say those words. And, when the war was over, 74, 75, the POWs came home. I wondered if my POWs made it.
Wow. The last mission came up, Fulak.
Mm-hmm.
What do you remember about that? That was a battle at night, right?
4 days.
4 days. Wow.
4 days. We killed 20 the second day.
Wow. What were those 4 days like?
We had contact every day. Firefight every day. I lost one man the first day. He got hit in the head, and we shipped him out, medevaced him. The chopper had to land, take him out. Yeah. And then they dropped me some more ammunition because I didn't realize it was going to be that big of a fight. But I had 10 men, and I had my machine gun with me, and I had plenty of grenades and stuff. So we they came at us, and we took them out. We were very good at that time. This is in April of 67, and we landed in April of 66. So by that time, I had change of personnel. Got some new guys in, but that team I had out there, we took it to them. 4 days of fighting.
And there were how many of you out there?
10.
10. Wow.
Mm-hmm. And my war dog.
Yeah. Your war dog was with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
King. Name was King.
King. Yeah, I saw that. I was reading yesterday.
Yeah.
What were the actions that led to that nomination? I know you've spoken about that moment a lot, but I want this particular audience to hear about that.
Well, this is Fulak. Okay, Fulak.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, when I got the mission, we went out to a group called a Combined Action Company. And these guys were sent out to live in the villages to win the hearts and minds of the villagers. They come over to American side and lived out there and educated them, and they went on patrols with them to help them protect the Army had the Green Berets out there doing that. We had the Marines out there doing that. It was a concept that win the hearts and minds. I'm not sure who come up with it, but instead of going out there fighting hard, we want them to come onto our side. Well, we're always fighting hard, but we got out there with the CAC guys, and we out there that night, and we left that camp there. These were the guys, the CAC guys, and did not live out there. So we were now going to take care of the guys who were attacking the villages and the whole bit. And plus, we were supposed to blow a NVA base camp, was on the reverse side of the mountain. That base camp was there to provide food and other kind of administrative services. And it was on the reverse side of the mountain. You couldn't see it from our side, but our spies told us it was there. They were building up to attack Way City, and they did attack it the next year, 68. But we were supposed to slow them down. That was my mission. So I went out there and I walked in with a group of grunts. It was at 326. There's a lot of controversy in terms of what somebody said to me, and Yerman said the captain said this, said that. I let them tell that story because I was more or less taking care of the battles. We walked through around a rice paddy that night when we left the CAC base, and all hell broke loose. Traces, every fifth round, of course, tracer. They were just all over the place. And I didn't let my guys get engaged because they were fighting against another group, and I wasn't quite sure who they were. So I skirted them, skirted all that, the bullets that was flying. And so I harbor sighted, held up in a graveyard. And a graveyard was like a Vietnamese graveyard, had a lot of seamen out there, and spent the night in that graveyard because I figured if we got hit, we could be protected by some of the concrete out there. So we spent the night out there and watched the fight. Then when the sun came up, we saw a group of Marines coming up. So we linked up with them. They didn't know we were there. We didn't open fire with them, but they, we're not seen very easily. Plus I got a dog with me. So they figured we were there. So we escorted them and we fought with them. For the 4 days, we had contact. They had contact also. But there was had 3 rifle companies and a battalion of artillery, or maybe a company of artillery. They saw us looking like we look as recon guys. When we go out, we look kind of scary, and the dog. So we went on by ourselves and got in many contacts, and the infantry did what they were supposed to do, but we guided them into the battle area. And then, after we fought our way to Fulak, there was a larger group of NVA set off a couple of claymores. And that's when all of us got hit. I was hit a bunch of times. As you know, my right leg was broken. My left leg was fractured. And,
This came from Claymore contact? Or?
Yeah, and they fired, obviously, when they set up the claymore. I still have bullet fragments in my legs and my thigh. But they did a good job taking care of me. But it was a nasty battle. We killed so many of them. They kept coming. Yerman come crawling over to me. He'd been hit, and all my guys were hit. My dog was dead. And Yerman said, we're all hit, sir. We can still fight, but we can't go forward. And that's when I made the decision I dropped everything we had on our position because I had my map out. We called the artillery, and I figured, well, we're in trouble. But I knew that the artillery guys would give us 50 meters grace. They wouldn't drop it right on us. So I gambled, and they dropped all kind of stuff. Then the Phantoms came in and blew the reverse side of the mountain, so that was a plus for us. It was hard because there was artillery all over the place. Everybody's bleeding and yelling and screaming, and the mouth and the nose. And I reached around him to take his dog. I think he was dead, really. Take his dog tags off, and in here was just nothing but blood. He said, I can still fight, sir. Give me a rifle. One of the bravest things I've ever heard.
Wow.
But he was bleeding, and, because my guys always know in our line of work, we have to keep the fire going. We can't get overrun. Those who are too severely wounded, the corpsman won't treat them. Harsh as it seems, he only can treat the guys that can still fight. And that's when Stanton says, give me a rifle, sir, I can still fight. And I gave him an M14, and he started fighting. Broke my heart. He's one of the ones that wrote the letter, a witness statement for the Battle of Fulak. And Sergeant Yerman wrote the other one. That's for the Medal of Honor. whether I deserved it or not, didn't really matter, but I did the best I could. Crapo, who passed away last year, he was my other radio man. My corpsman was hit. Nicola lost a leg.
Wow.
It was a scramble, to get everybody out of there, put out enough fire, and get evacuated. Bloody battle. I was hurt real bad, obviously, in my groin and the whole bit. So how brave my guys was. They wouldn't have captured us because they would fight.
How did you get out of that?
We walked to the airstrip, to the evacuation site.
Wow.
We had to walk. We carried each other.
How'd you make it? Just
hard. Blood was squishing out of my boot. They give me a shot of my corpsman to give me a shot of morphine. When you talk about the race situation, I'm a black officer, and my corpsman was a white guy from Alabama, and he ran through whatever hostile fire and jumped on me and gave me a shot of morphine. He didn't see a black guy there, but that's who we are. It's what we do. He said, "Stay down, sir. Stay down. You're hit." Well, I knew I was hit. He said, "Don't get up." And I had to get up because we had to fight. But the idea of him running, risking his life to jump on me, he passed away a few years ago, too. When we went down to the SEAL base to get the Silver Star and this award, Yerman showed up. Jack Wright got a Bronze Star. He wasn't with my team, but I wrote him up anyway because I heard what he did with O'Donnell's platoon. And I was the only officer left, so I wrote up some awards for other guys in other platoons. But we went to Tampa Bay. Yerman was there. Crapo was there. The kid who my dog handler, he was there. There was only 5 of us there, and all got Bronze Stars. I got a Silver Star. Now they want to upgrade that to Medal of Honor, but that's what I got then. And Bill was there with me. Of course, Yerman was there. He'd already got a Bronze Star for the POW mission.
Wow. Hey, you've been nominated 8 times, right, for the Medal of Honor?
Well, they looked at it over 8 times, I'm told.
Right, reviewed. Yeah. What do you think the issue is with that, and why?
I'm not Mr. Personality.
You see, that doesn't seem to be true to me.
Well, a lot of guys. In 1966, when I got commissioned, I was the first black officer in the history of recon or special operations. And nobody really knew me. And there were a lot of folks thought they just promoted him because he's black. Well, affirmative action don't work in combat. You pick the best guy you can pick. A few years ago, the Recon Association picked the best officer in the history of reconnaissance. And they picked me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
They picked the best team leader, the best corpsman, the best communicator, and I was picked the best officer. I was proud of that.
So there's obviously something going on, and some
guys jealous of me.
Yeah.
There were some guys who didn't come to my wife's funeral. They didn't come to my son's funeral.
Wow.
They didn't come to Tampa with us. I'm not an easy guy to get along with because back in those days, I'm not a yes sir, no sir type of guy. I did my job best I could, but there were a lot of guys who didn't see me in the same light as they saw a lot of white officers. I didn't go to OCS. I didn't go to college. You mentioned you're getting your master's. I never got a master's. I went to high school. I got my education I went to the amphibious warfare school in the Marine Corps, and I went to the University of Maryland at night when I was stationed at Fort Meade. I went there and studied psychology and English and whatever else it was. And I was close to getting a degree, and the war started, and I volunteered to go to Vietnam. I never matriculated, so when I got home, I started again, and things that we're talking about today, I was dreaming about. So I couldn't concentrate, so I never got a degree at the University of Maryland. So my wife and I were stationed in Hawaii, and I went to the University of Chaminade University. And after I retired, I was vice president of Jefferson Powder Corporation, and they sent me to Harvard Business School. So I had that education. I got a lot of stuff there, but I never matriculated. I never got a degree. I was with my line of work. I was overseas 11 years, and it was just so hard for me to get a degree. I thought one day I'd like to go back and get a degree, but I never was able to do that.
Wow.
Hey everyone, Tim K here. Sorry for the interruption, but obviously an incredible podcast. Part 1 of the podcast on Major James Capers Jr., a legend of the Marine reconnaissance community. We are headed into part 2 next week on the 10th. In the interim, check out the Marine Reconnaissance Foundation and all they have going on. We will provide the links in the description. Thank you for tuning in to part 1, part 2 next week. Don't miss it.
This has been the Veterans Project Podcast with our founder, Tim Kay. Check us out at www.thevetsproject.com, on Instagram at The Veterans Project, Facebook, The Veterans Project, and Twitter at Project_Veteran. Thanks for listening, and don't forget, our legacies are the mission.